Well, welcome to Wheaton College and welcome to another symposium for the Human Needs and Global Resources program. And it's my pleasure this evening to welcome our plenary speaker, Dr. Norman Uphoff. Norman Uphoff is a professor of government and international agriculture at Cornell University and was the first director of the Cornell International Institute for Food, Agriculture, and Development from 1990 to 2005. He currently serves as acting director of the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs, which is responsible for Cornell's MPA degree program. Uphoff received his BA degree from the University of Minnesota in 1963, then an MPA from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton in 1966. He earned his PhD from the University of California at Berkeley in 1970 in the fields of political science, public administration, and development economics. Professor Uphoff's work as an applied social scientist in the field of international development initially focused on development administration, local participation, irrigation management, and strategies and institutions for broad-based rural development. And up until this evening, I only had the pleasure of knowing Dr. Uphoff through his work on the local management of irrigation systems, which I read as a part of my own doctoral research in anthropology. So it is an honor to meet him this evening in person. Since 2000, however, his interests have expanded beyond the social sciences to include agroecology, and particularly the system of rice intensification, or SRI. This methodology has proven able to raise crop yields with reduced reliance on external inputs, while conferring on crops a degree of resistance to the stresses deriving from climate change. Uphoff's publications include two early books co-authored with Warren Ilchman, The Political Economy of Change and The Political Economy of Development. Other books include Local Organizations, Intermediaries in Rural Development, Local Institutional Development, Puzzles of Productivity in Public Organizations, Reasons for Hope, Instructive Experiences in Rural Development, and Reasons for Success, Learning from Instructive Experiences in Rural Development. His long list of journal articles attests to his interdisciplinary commitments, including publication in Human Organization, the preeminent journal in applied anthropology. His most recent book is an edited volume on biological approaches to sustainable soil system, which was published in 2006. His most recent published article, written with 3 microbiologists, is on the role of symbiotic endophytes, beneficial soil microbes that live within plants, tissues, and cells. I also hear on good authority that 20 years ago he was really into particle physics. He is one of those exceptional individuals for whom disciplinary boundaries really do not exist. The subject of Wheaton College's symposium this year, combining concern for the conservation of soil systems with an interest in social movements and collective action, matches very nicely his own personal and professional interests and commitments. Dr. Uphoff, we are delighted to have you here with us this evening, and now please join me in welcoming him to the college.
Thank you very much, Laura. Her introduction told you not only how old I am, but how undisciplined I am. I'm very pleased to be at Wheaton. I've had many alumni from this college come to Cornell, and I've appreciated working with them there. And I have especially impressed by the program, the hunger program we have here, which I've heard about many years ago. And I just learned a while ago that, in fact, the program dates back to one of my previous Cornell colleagues, Merrill Ewert, through his brother Norman. So I'm now knowing a bit more about how you got this vibrant interest in the same problems I've been concerned with for 40 years out here in the middle of the Midwest. As you can tell, I'm from Minnesota, and so I'm a sort of a neighbor here. I'm going to talk about something which has changed my life. As Laura's introduction said, I'm an applied social scientist. Was very happy with that work for quite some number of years, and then I went to Madagascar in 1993 as the director of CFAD, the Cornell International Institute for Food, Agriculture, and Development, and learned about what she referred to as the system of rice intensification, which you'll learn about tonight. And it took me 3 years to accept it because it was so counterintuitive. But after we saw our farmers around the Ranamafan rainforest in Madagascar get yields of 8 tons average of paddy compared to the previous average of 2 tons, without using new seeds, without requiring fertilizer, just compost from any decomposed biomass, and with less water. As a development person, I had to say, I can't, ignore this. It looks just too good to be true at first. But after 3 years of those results, I couldn't, stay away any longer. And so I started learning French, learning some agronomy so I could understand this. And you'll hear about this evening. I'm going to start with an overview. In this 21st century, we will need to learn how to produce more from less. This sounds like economists say you can't have a free lunch. But if we can't figure out how to do this, we're not going to have any lunch. So it's very important. This paradoxical relationship will be needed if we're going to have sustainable agricultural development or sustainable development generally. Our arable land per capita is declining. We have less and less reliable supplies of water, higher energy costs, higher input prices, and we need to protect and maintain the quality of our natural resources, our soil and our water and our air, and to ensure broad access to appropriate technologies that can reduce hunger and poverty. That's a very tall order. I'm going to suggest that we can actually do that, but we're going to have to think differently and then act differently. The Green Revolution technology you all know about from the 1960s, it contributed to meeting our food needs in the 20th century, but it's becoming less relevant to the emergent conditions of our 21st century. We can't relive the past. The key elements of this technology have been, first of all, the development and use of new varieties, then the application of more external inputs, provision of more and more reliable water, plus an agrochemical means of crop protection. That's sort of the Green Revolution in a nutshell. I'm going to ask a question that probably won't embarrass you because no one will put their hand up anyway. How many of you know the book by Francis Chabousseau called Healthy Crops, A New Agricultural Revolution? Probably no one has ever heard of the book. It was published in 1985 in French by a French scientist, but it was translated into English in 2004. I first learned about it from a Brazilian Fulbright student of mine at Cornell who told me about this grand theory to explain how plants succumb to bacteria, fungi, insects, even viruses, all with one theory to explain this and how we could counter that. And even though I'm a pretty broad-thinking person, this was too bold and challenging for me. But once I could read it in English and understand what was being said, it was very, very impressive. Those of you interested in agriculture, write that name down. You can get the book on Amazon. It's paperback, Healthy Crops, A New Agricultural Revolution. Chabousseau spent a whole career really trying to understand pests and disease problems in plants and developed this theory of trophobiosis. Horrible name. That may be one reason people don't pay attention to it. But don't let the name bother you. What it explains is how the use of nitrogen fertilizer affects the plant's uptake. Well, it causes the plants to uptake nitrogen into the system and to synthesize amino acids. But if they have a lot of amino acids, they're not going to metabolize them into proteins. And if they got all these amino acids floating around in the cell, cytoplasm, and in the plant sap, this is just what insects, bacteria, fungus, and viruses love. And so it really sets the plants up for infestation and exploitation. At the same time, if you're using certain kinds of agrochemical protection, especially chlorinated crop protection, this affects the plant's metabolism, so when they make the simple sugars through photosynthesis, these simple molecules don't get made into polysaccharides. And so they got all this abundance of simple sugars in their sap and cytoplasm, which is just setting up a feast for the insects, the bacteria, the fungi, and the viruses. And so what this book does is explain why a lot of our modern agriculture is really so vulnerable to these various predations. A figure from my colleague David Pimentel at Cornell, which sticks in my mind, is to tell us that in the period roughly 1950 to 2000, the use of chemical pesticides on our crops went up 14 times. And during that period, the percentage of our crops lost to pests went up from 7 to 13%. So we increased our chemical inputs to agriculture by 14 times and have doubling of losses. Something is really out of whack on this. And so anyway, the book Chabousseau, Healthy Crops, will tell you a lot about that. I gave it to the head of the Integrated Pest Management program at Cornell and said, would you read this, please? I'm not a scientist. I'm a social scientist. They're not real scientists. And would you tell me if there's anything you find wrong scientifically? He wrote back and said, this didn't find anything to object to. Can I keep the book? I said, yes, it's yours. So I recommend that very highly. Anyway, the Green Revolution strategy has come to be seen as the necessary, indeed the best or even only way we can achieve higher yields and more productivity. However, this seeds plus fertilizer plus water strategy has been encountering diminishing returns. These are figures put together from FAO and World Bank and other statistics. The green line is the per capita production of cereals worldwide. The red line is the total volume. And you'll notice that roughly since the mid-'80s, we have not been making gains on per capita production of cereals. And in fact, even in absolute terms, we've been plateauing roughly since the mid-'90s. No one talks about this. We keep hearing about how great the Green Revolution has been and will be, or needs to be maintained with this formula of new varieties, chemical inputs, and more water, because it's a very thirsty technology. But in fact, it's running into real problems. This is seen most clearly in China, where at the start of their Green Revolution in the 60s, the agronomic annual sufficiency was about 15 or 20 kilograms of rice per additional unit or kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer. By the early 80s, that had fallen to 9.1 kilograms per kilogram of nitrogen. By 2001, 6.4. And in 2006, it's said to be 5 to 10 still. But the point is that if we keep putting on more and more and more of these chemical fertilizers, we're going to have to put more just to keep running, to keep in place, so to speak. At the same time, the nitrate levels in China's groundwater supplies have been rising rapidly due to this overuse of fertilizer. Already 10 years ago, a paper from USDA by Jerry Hatfield said that the levels of nitrate in the groundwater supplies in many places were over 300 parts per million. And he reminded us that in the US, the EPA allows only 50 parts per million. And I'm sure that's gone up, and I haven't seen any more recent figures, partly because no one wants to confront this. Nitrate is a pollutant, but you can't smell it. It's, pretty, and it seems to be pretty invisible. But this is what China is doing to its water supply. We all know how our use of nitrogen in the US is affecting, for instance, the ecosystems in the runoff from our rivers. Anyway, these kinds of practices have unacceptable consequences and a bleak future. If anyone wants to discuss that, I'd be very glad to, but that's my conclusion. Fortunately, there are alternatives available to such a genocentric, input-dependent strategy, and these are alternatives that are both more productive and more economic, and I group them roughly under the heading of agroecological methodologies. These are methodologies that mobilize and utilize the biological potentials and the ecological processes and dynamics that already exist within crop plants that are inherent within the soil systems of which plants grow. So agroecology is ecological thinking applied to agriculture, or understanding agriculture in terms of ecology. These methods promote the growth of more productive phenotypes from any given genotype or variety. Does everyone know the difference between phenotypes and genotypes? Anyone bold enough to tell others what the difference is between phenotype and genotype? Any volunteers? You're all sitting out in the darkness, so you can sort of, avoid my question. Genotype is the variety or the genetic potential that any organism, all the way from bacteria to us, would have. But phenotypes are then the resulting phenomena that come from a particular initial genetic potential. Are you genotypes or phenotypes? You're all phenotypes. You started as a genotype, but you are now, because of the interaction between your initial endowment and the environment that you're living in, you become a phenotype. And the trick for agroecology is to take any given genotype and get a more productive, more robust, more nutritious phenotype. Because after we don't eat genotypes, we eat phenotypes. So how can we achieve these better phenotypes? By managing agroecosystems more productively, rather than by relying mostly on external inputs, and then by improving the crop's growing environment, both below ground and above ground. Some of you will know from your genetics class, if you take genetics, this symbolic equation, P is a function of G plus E plus G times E. That's the phenotype is a function of genetic potential and its environment and of the interaction between genetic potential and the environment. What SRI is teaching us, and again, I didn't study this in college, I can assure you, is that you can get really remarkable phenotypes by attending to this G by E interaction and by providing a more productive environment for plants to grow. Agroecological practices modify and optimize the management of the plants, the soil, the water, and the nutrients in ways that can mobilize the services of the plant-soil microbiome. That is the multitude of beneficial microorganisms that live in, on, and around plants. These are parallel to the uncountable numbers of beneficial microorganisms that live in, on, and around our human bodies, in what's now being called the human microbiome. I hope all of you know about the human microbiome. You might not have heard of the plant-soil microbiome, but you should all know about the human microbiome. Why? Do you know that there are 10 times more microbes in your body than all the cells in your body? 90% of you is not you. You are not organisms, you are systems. You are dependent on these trillions and trillions of bacteria and fungi, and possibly some we don't even know about yet, which are synthesizing vitamins, they're helping with digestive processes, they're helping our immune system, they give us protection against pathogens. We can't see them, so we often don't know about them or don't think about them, but the human microbiome is going to give us more advances, I think, in human health than anything except maybe antibiotics. But meanwhile, it turns out in the agricultural realm, understanding the plant-soil microbiome, understanding plants really as not just plants, but as systems, which are heavily inhabited by, dependent on microbes, is going to get us a long way. There are a number of different agroecological approaches, which include agroforestry, which I hope you all know about, conservation agriculture. What is the other name for conservation agriculture? No-till, where you treat the soil as a system with great respect, deference, and develop the soil fertility. Holistic land and livestock management, which Alan Savory has been the protagonist for. Again, if any of you work in animal systems, write down the name Alan Savory, go on to Google, and look up his material on holistic land and livestock management. Integrated pest management, I hope you all know about. Integrated crop fish culture, then SRI, and the system of crop intensification, which I'm going to be talking about. SRI was developed in Madagascar by a remarkable, very brilliant French Jesuit priest, Father Henri de Lalanier, who came to Madagascar in 1961 and spent the next 20-plus years talking to farmers, watching what they did, learning from them, learning with them. And he synthesized a set of practices that raised the yields without depending upon external inputs. And he sort of synthesized these in 1983, but then it took another 10 years to make further improvements. Unfortunately, he died in 1995. I never had a chance to meet him. As I told you, I was very skeptical about this at first. And so I didn't go talk to him because I wanted to wait and see if it really worked. Sadly, he passed away at age 75 before I could say, hey, he really had something to offer the rest of us. We started working with his NGO, Association Tevisina, which he set up in 1990. In 1994, we started doing trials around Ranamafan rainforest. And by 1997, 3 years of results, farmers averaging 8 tons on terrible soils before they formally got 2. I said, it's for real. And since that time, my life has been, as I said, taken over, hijacked. My wife can attest to that. SRI changes the way we manage the plants, the soil, the water, and the nutrients. It doesn't require outside inputs, it's a management strategy. We start with very young seedlings, less than 15 days old, tiny little seedlings. Usually farmers want 3 or 4 week old seedlings, big and healthy. when you transplant them, you feel good because you can see them in the field. If you transplant 15-day seedlings or 10 or 8-day seedlings, you can't see anything. You've done all that work and you can't see anything, but it pays off. We transplant single seedlings per hill, not 3, 4, or 5 in a clump, which farmers do all around the world, thinking it's more secure, it's going to give them better yield, not thinking there's no plants we know of that do better when you crowd them together. What happens if you put 3 tomato plants together in one hill? Nothing. So why do we put 4, 5, 6 rice plants in a clump? People have always done it. It's inertia. Anyway, we put 1 seedling per hill, and we put them very carefully in the ground and put them in a square space, 25 by 25 centimeters. We cut the plant population by 80% or 90% and still can get 2, 3, 4 times more yield because these plants are very different plants. We stopped the continuous flooding of rice paddies. Not many of you will ever have done rice farming, but you probably have the same instinctive feeling I had, even though I'm a dairy farmer from Wisconsin originally. To see a paddy field without standing water is really nervous, it makes you nervous. But SRI says, don't flood the plants. Why? If you put water on top of the soil, you are going to suffocate the roots. They can't get oxygen. The rice plants can survive if they don't have good root systems and good aerated soil, but they can't grow as well and perform as well if they have this kind of flooding. So we stop the flooding, which is pretty hard to do at first, but it works. We control the weeds with a mechanical weeder, which churns up the top parts of the soil, and then enhance soil fertility and the life in the soil with as much organic matter as possible. Those 6 things, or 3, depending on 5 things, some do it with 12, some with 6. The fact is, these practices can change the way in which the plants perform dramatically, as I'll show you. SRI practices induce the plants to have larger, healthier, better functioning root systems by reducing the plant populations per square meter. And within the soil systems, we then promote more biodiverse, more active populations of beneficial soil organisms. Now, we have more evidence of the first and the second, but we have enough in the second that I'm prepared to stand here and make that assertion. Both the roots and the soil biota make crucial contributions to crop production, but they also let us reduce the demand for both water and nitrogen fertilizer. Water is getting more and more scarce, fertilizer is getting more and more expensive. And so it does some very good things for our management. This is a picture from Sri Lanka of just a little simple hand weeder. In Sri Lanka, they got the cost down to close to $10, but usually it's about between $10 and $20. What it does is you push it up and down the rows, and it churns the topsoil up, and it buries the weeds as a kind of a green manure, but it also aerates the soil. So the roots and the soil organisms fare much better. Oops. Why do you think this is not going, Chris? There we go. Okay. So I'm going to give you some pictures which show you what these more productive phenotypes look like from available crop genotypes all around the world. We don't require new varieties. We don't use chemical fertilizer. You can use it if you want to. And it sometimes gives good results, but the best results come with really soil well-nourished with organic matter and reduce the water requirements. This is a picture from Madagascar. This is a traditional variety. It's unimproved. The yield was measured by a technician as a 17 ton per hectare yield in a country where the average yields are not much more than 2 tons per hectare. Look at the panicles of those rice heads. Spectacular. This is a picture from Nepal. This is a single rice plant from a single seed in the Tri of Nepal. Here's a picture, probably one of our most instructive ones from Cuba. This farmer is holding 2 plants that were started in the same nursery, the same variety, same genotype, same age, both 52 days after they were sown. The one on the right was taken out of the nursery when it was just 9 days old, transplanted single seedlings, wide spacing, kept aerated, not flooded, roots not suffocated. And the one on the left was taken out at 52 days when they were going to transplant it, because in Cuba they wait until 52-day seedlings to transplant. But that same genotype, if it was given an environment to grow in, like we recommend with SRI, it's 42 tillers instead of 5. And not just that, look at the difference in the root systems. Those are magnificent roots. And that's what gives you the chance. This farmer got 10 and 15 ton yields on his 2 fields his first time out. This is a picture of a rice plant that my wife and I were given by farmers in Indonesia. They were very proud. It was their best plant, probably. This has 223 tillers on it, which is 10 times more than you are happy with most rice production. And look at those roots. So this is the potential that little rice seed can have if you give it a good environment, both below and above ground. This is a picture sent to me by a researcher at the Rice Research Institute in Iraq, near Najaf, to show us where they tried the same varieties, paired. Each of those pairs, the one on the left is SRI practices, young seedling, wide spacing, no organic matter. On the right is conventional management, but these are all the same varieties. This is some research from China at the China National Rice Research Institute, where they took the same variety of rice and then looked at the weight of the different plant organs at initial heading, full heading, milky rice, wax rice, yellow rice stages. In China, that's how they divide their stages of growth up. And the purple is the panicle, that's the grains. And you see how different the plant grows. It starts out bigger at initial heading stage, but it stays larger all stages, and the grains expand tremendously. This is a report from India, which is now has the world record for paddy yield, where with SRI methods, a farmer got 22.4 tons per hectare. Now, he's using hybrid rice, so we'll give hybrid rice its due, and he used about 40 kg of nitrogen per hectare. So he's using some inorganics, but mostly it was chicken manure, it was biofertilizers, and so forth. That's a yield 10 times the usual yield in that state. So, and look at, if you can see those pictures, look at the panicles, the heads of rice, how massive those are. And hundreds of people came to watch the weighing and they're establishing that yield. By the way, 4 other farmers in that same village, the yields of 19, 20, and 21 tons. So it wasn't just this one farmer, there were 5 who hit the jackpot, got the soil biota mobilized to give the nutrients and the protection against pathogens for the plants. So I'm going to show you quickly, this picture shows these methods in very different environments. In Afghanistan, northern Afghanistan, where you're 1,600 meters above sea level, temperate climate, short growing season, or in Mali, in the Timbuktu region, which is on the edge of the Sahara Desert with hot, dry, subtropical climate. This is up in Afghanistan, the northeastern corner of the country. And these are farmers planting 13-day seedlings at 25 by 25 spacing. This is one of the technicians for the Aga Khan Foundation making a field visit. The Taliban actually deterred some farmers from working with them on this, so it's a pretty dangerous situation. There you see these little plants, single plants at 30 days, lots of space between them. Here's the plants then at 72 days. And this plant had 133 tillers and a yield of 11.56 tons per hectare, because it started with a young seedling, wide spacing, aerated soil, good organic matter, and you give it a totally different growth response than if you did the normal practice of more seedlings, older seedlings, crowding, flooding, and so forth, which did not bring out the genetic potential. And that's a picture of SRI on the left and the conventional plant on the right, and you see the kind of yield results you're getting with less water. And that's a very serious constraint for Afghan farmers up there. This is Mali. That's a rice nursery. And these are 8-day seedlings now as they're getting ready for transplanting. And this is a pretty barren, desolate area. The soil is not bad if it has some water, but it needs water and it needs organic matter here. The transplanting is going on, 25 by 25 spacing. And here's the farmer holding the SRI plant on the right, the conventional ones on the left. And again, they calculate 32% less water for yields, 8, 9 tons per hectare versus their usual yields of 4 and 5. So this is a picture I threw in also from Indonesia, which is a tropical environment. This is from Aceh, where the Catholic NGO Caritas introduced SRI after the tsunami in 2005, and they quadrupled the yields of the farmers working with them from 2 tons to 8.5 tons. The quote from their report in Caritas News was, using less rice seed, less water, and organic compost, farmers in Aceh have quadrupled their crop production. So anyway, the environmental benefits that we see with this is you reduce the water requirements because there's higher crop water use efficiency. This means we're not putting so much pressure on the other ecosystems that need water and which are in competition with agriculture. We get higher land productivity, so you don't have to keep cutting down more forest, clearing more land to feed ourselves, because we can now intensify our production on the available land and meet our food needs that way. Use less inorganic fertilizer. Former chief executive of Britain's National Environmental Research Council said, reactive nitrogen is the third major threat to our planet after biodiversity loss and climate change. Again, we don't take it that serious enough, but I think he's quite correct in that. We can get away with that kind of dependence. Less reliance on agrochemicals for crop protection, which enhances the quality of both our soil and our water. We can buffer against the effects of climate change, against storms, droughts, etc., and even reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases from paddy fields. This is evidence. We did a meta-analysis at Cornell. We had started with 400 studies and cut it on 120 for those that had water, and we had 29 studies that had a lot of detail on how they compared SRI and conventional management. And across these 251 comparison trials that were included, SRI management used 22% less total water and 35% less irrigation water with higher yields. So you, in fact, had a real benefit, and that meant that the water use efficiency, the amount of kilograms of rice produced per liter of water, went up 52% for total water, irrigation plus rainfall, or 78% just looking at the irrigation water alone, more crop per drop. This is a picture from Sri Lanka showing two fields, same variety, same soil, and same drought, where the plants on the left were conventionally grown, older seedlings, crowding, flooding, and they looked better for a while, but once you get 3 weeks of water withdrawal, they start browning and losing momentum. On the right were SRI plants, tiny seedlings, wide spacing, no flooding, and you see they're able to withstand the drought and still give a normal yield. This picture from Vietnam, about hours north of Hanoi, after a storm, tropical storm had passed over, and the right you see conventional rice, lodged, blown down by the force of the wind and the rain. On the left are the SRI plants. Not one of them was affected by the storm. And you see the difference in the plants themselves in terms of both the plant and also the root systems. This woman and her neighbors were, in fact, going village to village in their area then to show other farmers the difference in the plants and tell them about their experience. This is one of my favorite pictures, probably because I know the farmer who gave it to me. This one wonderful woman farmer does SRI. Her plants are on the right. On the left is her neighbor, who used modern varieties, chemical inputs, and their village was hit both by tropical storm and by brown plant hopper, a very terrible pest. And the color change is because we call it brown hopper burn, and then the lodging. So the neighbor got virtually nothing for all of his investment. She got an 8-ton yield of organic, traditional variety SRI. And of course, she's one of our most enthusiastic farmers, but you see that kind of evidence. Look at the difference. These are side by side, same stresses from climate and from pests, a total difference. And this is, we're just getting information on this, but we're seeing, as I said, less emission of greenhouse gases. Methane gas goes down greatly, but there's not an offsetting increase in nitrous oxide. So this researcher from Kangwon University in Korea calculated there's a 78% reduction in the amount of global warming potential from the greenhouse gases emitted from their paddy fields. And here's a picture of the plots there. What's interesting is that we're seeing these ideas, these practices now being extended to other crops, so we call it system of crop intensification. These are most of them farmer-led innovations, but they're often supported by NGOs or some other civil society organizations. Wheat, sugarcane, finger millet, mustard seed, teff, sorghum, plus maize, barley, soya beans, lentils, pigeon peas, kidney beans, etc. Finding that almost all plants respond to adaptations in spacing, timing, water management, soil structure, and so forth. These are pictures from tests done in Mali under the AfriCare program. You see the numbers of tillers on typical SRI plants versus conventional. You see the difference in the size of the panicles, the heads of grain here. This is a publication from the International Crop Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics and the Worldwide Fund for Nature, which collaborated looking at SRI in India, and they also then started looking at the adaptations for sugarcane. 20 to 100% more yield with 30% less water, 25% less chemicals, and that's now starting to move very well in India. These are finger millet plants, typical to represent the different plots. On the right, you see a typical traditional plant with traditional management. In the middle is improved variety with SFMI management, they call it. And you see that, if you have better genetic potential, you get a better plant. But if you change the management, then you see also the kind of expression of that potential that can be induced. We talked at supper this evening about teff, which is the most popular cereal grain in Ethiopia. And it's a little tiny seed like mustard, 2,500 seeds per gram, and they usually go out and broadcast and get 1 ton yield. If you take seedlings of the little tiny seeds and transplant 20 by 20 centimeters at about 20 days, you get a whole different plant. Yields 3 to 5 or more tons instead of the 1 ton with conventional management. And so these arguments I want to stress do not argue against making further genetic improvements or against the use of all external inputs. SRI, I say, is not doctrinally organic, it is pragmatically organic. And the fact is our highest yields have come with hybrids, high-yielding varieties. On the other hand, traditional varieties can do very well if they're given appropriate growing conditions. And so since the market price is often higher for the traditional varieties because it has better taste and texture and aroma, it can be more profitable to do an 8-ton traditional variety versus a 16-ton hybrid variety. So we tell farmers to make their choice. What these pictures and the data, which I'd love to have told you more about, suggests that progress is made right now at low cost with savings of water, of buffering against climate change just by changing our crop management practices, especially attending to the peripheral nurturing of roots and the soil biota. I keep coming back to that theme. If there's one thing you walk away from tonight, I hope you remember roots and soil biota. There's very little research on either of them. It's difficult, messy, complicated, but in fact, that's really where I think our future is going to lie. The benefits of these management practices we have seen demonstrated now in over 50 countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We started with Madagascar, then China, Indonesia, Bangladesh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we just added now Malawi, Cameroon, and Liberia this year to our SRI list. Now, you want to talk about social movements, I'm going to say a bit about that. That this is really a civil society innovation. It did not come from our research stations, did not come even from our land-grant universities. It came from the work of a very dedicated, I think brilliant priest who spent half his life, working with farmers in Madagascar. It's been picked up by all kinds of people. Our main catalyst for SRI in Cuba is an animal nutritionist. When she retired, she was told to help develop rice for the Ministry of Sugar in Cuba. And she wrote to me in Cornell and said, I just heard about this rice system, so send her stuff, and she's been working on this. An electrical engineer is leading our work in the Philippines. Sometimes it's civil servants, like in Sri Lanka. Sometimes it's agronomists, like in Cambodia. But in fact, it's all kinds of people who simply have seen the opportunities that these new ideas and new practices can bring to benefit poor, hungry people. And so I say supporters come also from individuals in government agencies, universities, research institutes, foundations, donor agencies, private sector, media, et cetera. And a few individuals just come forward, retired school teachers, have picked this up. So what we've seen is some people call this SRI movement. I avoid that word because it makes scientists really nervous. But in fact, you could analyze this as a movement, and I hope people will. We've been partly inspired by this wonderful statement from the anthropologist Margaret Mead, which I hope you've all seen before, but if not, commit it to memory. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think that must be probably one of your mottos here for the hunger program. You're not many, but don't forget that you can change the world by working together. Economics, environmental vulnerabilities, and the effects of climate change will require a different kind of agriculture in the 21st century. I make that as an assertion. But I'm saying the world has changed considerably on the parameters I mentioned at the outset for what was like in the 20th century. I'm not knocking the Green Revolution. It was the best we knew how to do, and it did make some very substantial increases in food production. But we can't keep doing more of the same. We can't keep having, such heavy dependence on chemicals, on water. Breeding programs take a long time, and we're reaching some diminishing returns even on our breeding programs. So I say we need to rebiologize agriculture. We try to make agriculture an industrial enterprise, make it as predictable and mechanistic, as controlled as industries. But agriculture is and will remain always a biological undertaking. We are trying to understand and work with and take advantage of what's already there in nature. We need an understanding of agriculture that's more informed by disciplines of microbiology, crop physiology, soil ecology, epigenetics. How many people know about epigenetics? Should be at least a few hands. There's one, okay. Anyone else? Epigenetics? If you haven't heard of this, just go to Wikipedia and look up epigenetics and read their little squib on it. This is going to, some of you remember that wonderful movie with Dustin Hoffman where the man, the graduate, where the older uncles are his plastics, young man, plastics. Well, I say epigenetics, young woman, epigenetics. I think epigenetics is going to have a huge impact. This is built upon genetics, but it's dealing not with the DNA per se, but with the expression. What is it that triggers that expression? And what you've seen here is really epigenetic phenomena. The same genes, but you get a different expression by giving it different environments. What I don't have time tonight to talk much about, but I'll get into it if you ask me, is how we're understanding now that the microbes even affect how the plant's genetic expression is either upregulated or downregulated. So it isn't like the DNA is a blueprint that cranks out plant according to the design of the DNA, but microbes in the plants, in the cells, in the tissues, are affecting the ways in which that genetic potential, that DNA, gets expressed. And that's where epigenetics comes in. So I want you to think about that. These fields I just mentioned are all becoming more prominent in our contemporary science. We need a citizenry and a scientific establishment that is more open to new ideas. People should not be overawed by scientific authority. It's not just me as a political scientist, but all my SRI colleagues in many, many different disciplines who have really read, studied, experimented, observed, measured, who have in fact put together this phenomenon which we now see as SRI. We should seek and respect evidence and systematic knowledge, but we should not be blinded by it. The whole history of science, in fact, is of learning things and then having to unlearn them. And unfortunately, those who've learned things and acquired certain status and recognition are usually pretty reluctant to unlearn things that have made them maybe not rich and famous, but at least well-placed and recognized. But a lot of our sciences has to be continually revised and improved. I've talked about epigenetics, talked about the microbiome. These are things which I think are going to change the world that, especially the younger members of the audience, not me, will experience in the rest of their lifetime. And so pay attention to these. I could talk much longer, but I've actually held myself to 45 minutes, so there's time for questions and response. I want to thank you. I have our website up there. You know what that website is? It's huge, but it's well organized. So you want to get the scientific papers, you want to get to the country reports, you want to get the videos. We have some fantastic videos that have been done, none of them by us, by people in different countries. And YouTube is full of SRI videos. Just go to YouTube and look SRI, and you'll get probably 200 videos from at least 20 countries, maybe 25 now. And that's my email. If you have a question, send me an email. I'll try to answer it or refer you to some other place. So I think that's where I'm going to stop the talk, but I saved a few slides in case you asked me about microbiology. Okay? Thank you. So Laura, you're going to be the field of questions. Okay?
And we do have time for questions, so please come to the central microphone. I'll start off with one question.
Okay.
That would just be, can you tell us some more about how the technology has made pathways through different institutions of being accepted or rejected, or why do you think it's taken the pathways that it has?
Pathways is a word I wouldn't have used, but I guess I know what you mean by that. In large part because this didn't come from within the scientific community, it's been very difficult for the scientists to accept it. And also one of the problems I mentioned at supper, we often find that when scientists do their trials on experiment stations, they don't get as good results as farmers get on their fields. Now, this is one of the first innovations where farmers, are ahead of the scientists, or where scientists have a hard time replicating farmer results, whereas usually farmers have a hard time replicating scientists' results. I was at Erie, the International Rice Research Institute, 10 years ago now, and looked at their trials. First time they tried SRI methods on Los Banos experiment station, they had a yield of 1.3 tons per hectare. I've almost never seen that kind of a yield. I don't know what they did, but 1.3. Next year they had a 3-ton yield, which was at least better, but even their own best management practices in that set of trials only gave 4 tons. In fact, I remember one of the Erie scientists saying to the other ones, if we can't do better than 4-ton yields with our BMP on the station, what are we here for? How can we spend these millions of dollars and we can't do better with our best seeds and best recommendations, which is the Philippine average is 4 tons. And our farmers who used SRI methods, about 25 by that time, had averaged 6 tons. They got 3. And so the research manager asked me, why did I think they were having a hard time getting the same results that we were reporting from farmers' fields? And I said, if you permit me, I think that after all these years of monocropping, rice, no rotation, which will always give you more biodiversity if you have different crops with different exudates and different organisms, and also all those fertilizers and all the pesticides and weedicides and fungicides and molluscicides, I think your soils may be almost dead. Now that's an extreme overstatement. It's probably just suppressed or unbalanced. But, they had no idea because they weren't looking at the biology. They measure the soil chemistry, to the 8th decimal point, and they look at soil physics, not as much, but somewhat, but they don't look at soil biology. So they don't know what's living in those soils, and maybe very little is living there now after all this continuous work. But it's been very hard for scientists to accept that we're reporting the truth because they don't get this on their own trials. A few exceptions. And we've had a few scientists who've done wonderful work and are fully on board, but the majority have not. The International Rice Research Institute has had a very hard time accepting this. They looked at this in Madagascar. In fact, I went to the Erie representative in Madagascar when I first heard about this. And I didn't believe it, but I thought, here's this fantastic system where I'm told they get 5, 10, 15 tons per hectare without new seeds, without fertilizer. So I'll go to Erie and ask what they think about it. I asked the rep, I said, have you heard about this? Mm-hmm. Have you evaluated it? No. Well, why not? Well, the Madagascar scientists have done their evaluation. They can't get those results. The priest reports no 10 or 15 tons. I said, well, what yields do they get? 6, 7, 8. But we can get those with our seeds and our inputs, so it's not really improving upon what we can do. And because I didn't believe SRI could do that, I didn't ask them the obvious question, which you should have always saying to yourself, if you can get 6, 7, 8 ton yields without new seeds and without having to buy fertilizer, without having to take loans and go into debt, shouldn't that be interesting? But I didn't think it myself, so I didn't ask them that question. But the fact is, when I first talked to Erie, first of all, they said it's not true. Then they said, well, it's nothing new. They said, okay, it's new, but you can't do it on a large scale because it's so labor intensive. It's only good for small farmers. And my answer to that was, there are an awful lot of small farmers in the world. Something that's really good for small farmers can be large scale. Now, it's not good for 50 and 100 acre farm operations, although we're changing that too. But initially, we accepted it was really especially designed for and especially good for people who had very little land and very little cash to spend. But the attitude has been really, it's not modern. At least they don't think of it as modern. This is really going back to dibblestick stuff, They want things that are modern. Scientists generally want things that are modern and new, publishable kinds of results. So I have to say, even at Cornell, there's not been much interest or enthusiasm. So I'm not going to knock Erie, since I have to say my own institution has been similarly ambivalent about all of this. But this is starting to change. I mean, we're up to 50-plus countries now, and EFAD president gives us endorsements. The head of AID has seen this in Haiti and written in a personal blog on the AID website that, yes, it does what we've been saying. So it's starting to come, but it's a very slow, it has been a terribly, for me, painfully slow process. Others will look and say, this is going at lightning speed. I mean, in Bihar state of India, they started with 30 hectares in 2007, 128 farmers. These are small farmers, about a quarter hectare only. By 2012, up to 335,000 hectares, and the government's aiming for 1 million hectares now. So in some ways, this moved very fast, but only where there's been enough acceptance so that the scientists and the extension people aren't knocking it down or bad-mouthing it and making apprehension. Farmers will be apprehensive at first for understandable reasons. Tiny seedlings, only one seedling. What if a crow comes and takes it or a snail eats it? Don't flood your field. All these things look risky. They're counterintuitive. Until you think about the science, and you can actually, in scientific terms, explain why each of these is a beneficial effect. And at this point, Erie will now say that the practices themselves are all beneficial, but they won't believe the large super yields. And I don't care about super yields myself. I look at averages. Super yields, the outliers don't feed people. It's the averages that feed people. So if we can go from 2 tons to 8 tons, shouldn't that be of interest? They may not believe 16, 18, 21 tons. Okay, forget that. The real importance is the averages. And when you can get even 50% higher average yield, that's a huge benefit for people. Anyway, I've gone too long. Here. Question here.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask you, what is your opinion on the commercialization of biotechnology and seed biotechnology, genetically modified crops, and how does it affect small farmers and the work that institutions like SRI do when international law is being developed to protect small private organizations that may take species from different areas around the world and then modify them, patent them, and protect them?
Wow, what a question. That's a 45-minute, I'm not going to give you a 45-minute answer, but it's a good question. First, I'll make an observation as someone who works on agricultural development. We've seen in my lifetime, which is fairly long, a movement from where agricultural technology were essentially open access. We invested public money in the land-grant institutions. Whatever they developed, they made freely available to everybody. And we've seen a proprietization of most of our knowledge so that it can be owned by the private sector, sold, royalties, patents, and so forth, collecting on this. And that's another reason why we're swimming against the stream. We're going against a large-scale trend towards privatization of agricultural research and knowledge. Too bad. I will say, for instance, I think that one of our problems with the GM situation is that the companies that are investing in this, and I'm glad they'll invest in it, however, are not unbiased. They should not be doing the evaluations. We need independent people to do the evaluations. I'm not as negative on GMOs generally as many of my colleagues, and maybe as you are. I think there are times and places when GM work can be very well justified. I've supported some myself as director of CFAD, but there's a lot which I'm very dubious, skeptical, even negative on. I think the Roundup Ready thing has been a really harmful thing. We don't know the end of that yet. But for instance, at Cornell, we did research where they were able to, through genetic modification, to get the roots of rice or wheat plants to express more trehalose, which is a natural sugar. And that gave the plants more resistance to salinity, to cold stress, and to drought stress. And I think if we get plants naturally to express more trehalose and be able to survive under bad conditions, because that's what poor farmers usually have. The good land is usually in the hands of the richer farmers. So something which really helps to give protection against these stresses is probably more beneficial for the poor than the richer ones. I think that was justified. I couldn't see any harm in that. But I think we do need to be very skeptical, and I accept fully the principle the Europeans introduced of, they have a nice fancy word for it. Well, if something's being done which can't be reversed, we've got to be really careful. And there's a huge burden of proof. And that's not just when you do tests in 2 years. It may be a 5 or 10-year testing process, because some of these things don't show up right away. I think that a lot of the opposition to GM, though, really reflects people's unease about the privatization of these technologies. And they don't trust large corporations to be fair-minded, to reveal all the information, not to stack the deck. So it's complicated. So we could talk for a long time. I'll mention a book, which I'm sure Monsanto would not like me to mention, but you might look at it. It's called a book called, Marguerite, you remember? Pardon? The World According to Monsanto by M. Robin, R-O-B-I-N, a French writer. I think anyone who's serious about the world food situation should know that. You don't have to believe everything. I think it's well documented. It's really a shaking book about this. And Monsanto will probably have someone tracking me for this, but anyway, I recommend that. It's a good subject. It'll be a whole other discussion, but I think I can summarize and say that we have to face up that the privatization of agricultural knowledge. We used to believe firmly that the public had an interest in generating this knowledge and making it widely available free. So everyone has access to it. Let companies compete on quality, but not controlling whether or not someone can have that particular technology. And so I would love to see us, the other thing was the Supreme Court decided, you could patent genes. Now they're backing off that. The idea of owning genetic material, I think, is also anathema and should have no legal standing. So I think we got a lot of big problems, and they're often political. I guess it was back in my political science area. What I can say is that if we can keep the marketplace of ideas open, I think we make a lot more progress. So I don't like the proprietarization. Again, I better stop with that.
No, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hi.
Good evening, Doctor.
Where are the women? Women are all quiet. Men are speaking up tonight. Okay.
There's a good number of them.
Okay.
I'm interested in how you bring this into new places, how SRI operates and brings these techniques into new places. And you mentioned that you work with civil society organizations and you work with NGOs, but what does your model look like for that, I guess? Our
model is no model, in the sense that we work with anyone, from Greenpeace to Syngenta. We've worked, with Greenpeace in China, Syngenta in India, other places. Syngenta, by the way, has been much more open and I think honorable in our relations than some of the other big companies. We have to find people who are willing to invest something in this. And it's usually individuals investing their own time and energy, sometimes their own money too, and we've had some of those wonderful people do this. We need to be able to demonstrate this on farmers' fields. We've really not emphasized experimentation, although when we do it in farmers' fields, we try to make it as proper comparisons, same varieties, make sure the soils are similar drainage and so forth, and then work with, a model one in a way was in Mali. And in Mali, a farmer up in Timbuktu tried these methods. I don't know how he learned about them, but he got a 9-ton yield. And he contacted Africare, a very good NGO working in that country. So happens the wife of the country representative had worked in Madagascar, and she knew SRI. And they had been working with these villages in Timbuktu area for some time. She wrote to me because she was a good friend of mine. I wrote to the Better You Foundation of Jim Carrey, the actor who's been our main benefactor. By the way, you'll be interested to know that Jim Carrey has been the most generous person to help us work on these questions. And the foundation made a grant, and so she went to 12 villages and introduced the ideas, showed slides, pictures, and so forth, and got 5 volunteers in each of the 12 villages to say, I'll do both methods side by side, and we'll make a comparison for everyone to see. These were volunteers, but they had the community assent. Say they're going to be testing our 9-ton average yield again for 60 farmers. And because Erica's a PhD in agronomy, which I'm not, her report was, had all the elegance and specificity that agronomists look for. Next year, it was like 4 times that many, and then they started working in other parts of the country. Unfortunately, Mali's had some political problems, as you probably know. We were really starting to take off there, but we have very good support within the government and other NGO communities. USAID was very helpful for the first year and then backed off. I don't know why. They changed directors or something like that. But it's coming. But meanwhile, that has led now to what started just this last month, a 13-country program in West Africa, which the World Bank is funding. The director is a Malian, but it's got all 13 countries, and there's now like $20 million available for projects to come up from these 13 countries to test and demonstrate and extend SRI. NGOs can apply for that. Oxfam is going to be putting some proposals in different countries where it works. It can be departments of agriculture. There's a wonderful Liberian NGO that's taking the lead there. They just had a very successful national conference on this. So we'll work with anybody. In some places, it is government people. Again, one of the best stories for that, in Tripura state of India, Baharul Islam, a rice agronomist, got a paper of mine, read it, said, it doesn't make sense, but I'll try it. That's the difference. People will actually try it and see. And he did it for 2 years and saw this phenotypical difference. Next year, he got 44 farmers on like an acre to try it, and then he got 88 the next year, and then 440 to do a hectare, and then 880. So he had 4 years of experience. And he'd done this really on his own. His boss probably had to say it's okay, but on his own. At that point, he brought the chief minister of the state, the minister of finance, minister of agriculture, secretary of agriculture, come see the fields, talk to the farmers and hear them. And the chief minister actually turned to Baharul and said, this is really impressive. We need to get our grain production up. I'll give you a third of our state's agriculture budget for the year. Go for it. And so this was 6 weeks before the season was starting. So Baharul told me, not in a boasting way, he said, I slept in my car for 40 nights in a row, covering the whole state in those 6 weeks. If he'd gone home at night to sleep in his bed, which he was entitled to do, he couldn't have made the whole state covered that time. They went from 880 to 32,000 farmers, then 72,000 next year, and 160,000, 250. I mean, it's just taken off in there. And this is a case where the government's behind it, and they give some subsidy to get farmers to try it the first time, but it's an individual, again, who is totally dedicated. He's a charming, energetic person. Marguerite and I have spent a week with him visiting villages in Tripura. And so it can be government people. Sometimes NGO people, sometimes government people, in some cases university people. It comes back to what a slide I had. It's been individuals. And then the other thing, to flip it over, is not to think of the farming community, all farmers at one time. That makes them abstractions. It homogenizes them. Farmers are as different as all of you are. You all know how different you are from each other. You may be students at Wheaton College, but you're not all the same. Well, by golly, farmers in any community are not all the same either. And there can be some who are more curious, more venturesome than others. And so we all say, start with those who are the most curious and venturesome, preferably to have them do their experimentation with everyone else's assent, and they're going to watch and draw conclusions from it too. And don't try to get everyone at once. Get the willing. And then, let the results speak for themselves once you've got that. So we try to develop materials, good in local languages. We do that. Sometimes they develop videos. We have some wonderful videos on YouTube. I think I mentioned, go to YouTube and put in SRI, and you'll have hundreds of videos produced, not with any of our money or interest. Well, we put money into one in Nepal. I will say a very beautiful one on that. But otherwise, they're just coming up. And there's one from Madagascar and Rwanda and Burundi that is probably the best. I should send it to you, Laura, so you can send everyone who wants this. It's a beautiful, and again, this example shows these two British filmmakers, videographers, were in Burundi for IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And they came across this strange-looking rice field. Single seedlings, one per hill. They were curious. And these are not agriculturists, but they're bright. Being bright always helps, of course. And they found the woman who was doing this, a woman named Matilda, who had been to Rwanda to an IFAD project there and learned it there and brought it back. She has spearheaded a spread to 18,000 farmers in Burundi. And that was 2 years ago, so it's probably double or triple that by now. But they got so impressed by Matilda's story and her results and her confidence that they took a lot of video footage, and they were going to Rwanda next so they could video farmer interviews there. And then they went to Madagascar, and they put together the most beautiful set of videos. They did the first one on spec, and once I saw it, I got IFAD to give money to produce the other 4 training videos, so it's a set of 5. But these are farmers themselves speaking about their experience, and it is really moving. First of all, it's moving to see this tremendous articulation and commitment, but also the results they report. So this is a very human thing, and it's not en masse. It's individuals from the dissemination side, it's individuals from the acceptance or experimentation. evaluation and acceptance side. And I know some farmers who've trained more than a couple thousand farmers themselves at their own expense because they're so committed to this. They want others to have the same opportunities to have, I asked one of the farmers who trained at least 4,000 farmers in Sri Lanka why he did. They said, I want paddy fields where my children can play safely. So that was his motivation. He spent much of his life. Now, Oxfam Australia, to its credit, hired him about 6 years ago to be their SRI trainer, supervisor, and so forth. So he's actually now employed by an NGO to do this. But on his own, he was doing this before because he just had the conviction and also the talent for that.
Yeah.
But there's no model. We have all kinds of ways this has happened, and sometimes with government support, sometimes against government support, sometimes with donors helping, sometimes donors ignoring. The World Bank is starting to come around. They've had pretty good projects in India. They just helped us get started with good results in Malawi, where the farmers are very excited. So the World Bank, lots of different agencies are coming into this. Nothing's happened like this before. I use the word unprecedented. Mm-hmm. It's both unprecedented in the technological innovation, but also in the way it's been done. That's why I like your title. Because social movements are really part of this. It's not just technical or just social. It's a hybridization that way. You want to follow up?
Yeah, I'm wondering, has this failed anywhere? Has it failed to take on, or has the technique failed to produce in any areas? And what did you learn from that?
You have to speak more clearly. I'm not hearing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Did this fail anywhere? Any place where it failed to catch on, or where the techniques didn't work? And why would you learn?
We've done some studies on disadoption in India. When farmers are not confident they'll be able to have enough water or have water when they need it, that's a big disincentive. So Andhra Pradesh, for many years, was very slow to move because their system, the electricity to pump the water is very irregular, and so they were scared to start it. It turns out if they were able to have gotten their plants growing the first 2 or 3 weeks with enough water and get deep roots, that wouldn't be a problem. But it's hard for people to see that. We found in one place in northern Thailand, northeast Thailand, that if you don't flood the fields because they have a lot of nematodes endemic in the soils, that nematodes, which are normally controlled by flooding, hypoxia, became a problem. So that's the one place where we've had lower yields rather than higher. But almost everywhere else it's higher, 10, 20, 40, 50, 100, sometimes 200, sometimes 300%. So it can fail. First of all, anything biological can fail. Yeah. But I've developed a lot of confidence. We've seen it in Nepal, we have one farmer at 2,700 meters doing SRI. Not the highest yields, but it's improved yields with small seedlings, widely spaced, and no effort to try to keep them flooded. So from Timbuktu to partway up in the Himalayas, it's amazing. I still don't fully understand this. And again, what I say, my role is not to get people to do it or to implement it. I want people to try it. I think that's the only ethical position you can take. Try it. It's not like a GM or a chemical thing where you could have some negative effects. Changing the spacing, the aging, there's no harm in that. And maybe risking a small area, but try it. If it works for you, it's yours. That's the way we work.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is about sort of the complex nature of soil biology and how you mentioned that a lot of scientists have tried to replicate the SRI method and have had varying success. And what you just said about nematodes attacking the rice in certain areas. I was just wondering what you think about the future for soil biology improvements, and if you think there's we'll ever have really adequate methods in order to measure the health of soils, soil biological environments, or if, because I just see that as something that is difficult for scientists and for people to work with because they don't see the direct results that maybe improved seed genetics or higher quality fertilizers might bring. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
But it's not it's harder to make that proprietary. A seed you can own and license and sell and collect royalties on. If it's really soil organisms you're stimulating, they're already there in the soil, but you want more and more diversity and so forth, that's really hard to make a private profit from the input side on. It's really the farmers who benefit from that. The study of soil biology, I mean, it used to be that we had maybe 3 to 5% of our soil science was soil biology. 70, 80% was soil chemistry and then physics, but soil biology was very little. In the last 10 to 15 years, our methods for analyzing the soil biota have changed tremendously, improved 3, 4, 5 times, I would say. And we're using all kinds of techniques. I'm not using them myself, so I can't reel off all the acronyms for them. But I do know from my colleagues who work in soil biology that we now have much more capacity, and I think that's going to grow in the future. The first thing is the paradigm shift, to stop looking at the microorganisms as the bad guys, all bad guys. Our Cornell Department of Plant Pathology has finally changed its name to the Department of Plant Pathology and Plant Microbial Interaction. That's progress. My colleagues say they really haven't changed that much, but the name's changed, but at least they're pointing in that direction. I think just as in human health, we have to start thinking about the beneficial effects or the systemic effects that's going to be coming in plant science as well. If I were a young plant scientist, I would certainly work in that because I think that's where the growth and the opportunities are going to be greatest. And if I were starting over again, I would go into soil biology myself. It's fascinating. I get sort of dragged along by colleagues who get me really excited. And again, I should probably send that article to you, Laura, if people. The article was mentioned, written with 3 microbiologists looking at symbiotic endophytes. I don't know if I've got. Let's see, did I get? I might have dropped the one I was looking for. Well, yeah. No, I think that's my problem, not yours. I didn't put it in. Okay, but this is one that really, hit me. This is a case where a Chinese researcher at the Institute of Botany and the China Academy of Sciences published in a very excellent journal. You may know the Journal of Applied and Environmental Microbiology, one of the gold standard journals. Took soil, sterilized it, homogenized it, and put it in 6 sets of pots to grow rice in. And sort of same variety of rice in all sets of pots. First one he did nothing to, as a control. Then he put 5 different kinds of rhizobia, or rhizobacteria, in the different sets of pots. And then grew them, and then at certain stages would analyze them. And you see the figures up here on the total plant root volume per pot, the shoot dry weight per pot, shoots the part above the ground, the net photosynthesis rate, the water utilization efficiency, and the grain yields per pot. Significant difference for all 5 of those rhizobial strains. And not just statistics significant, but some really big differences simply from having the bacteria. And again, he took electron microscope and showed in the article how these bacteria migrate up the stems into the leaves and inhabit those. That was really quite stunning to see that. And then he just, 5 years later, another article in the journal Proteomics, doing what they call proteomic analysis, where they looked at tissues in the roots, in the sheaths, and in the leaves of the plants, and they were able, through analysis in terms of comparing the concentration of proteins, which identify specific genes in the plant biome, and see upregulation or downregulation in the plants themselves. It turns out that they had significant increases or decreases of proteins in the plants that had the infections of soil rhizobia versus the control, which had no inhabitants from below. In the leaves, for instance, there was a protein that's very critical for photosynthesis, which was upregulated. In the roots, another protein which is important for protecting its pathogens, upregulated simply because there was a presence, inhabitation of these organisms. So we're seeing some really interesting things starting to come, and I think we're going to better and better techniques. I don't know if any of you are working in this area. If you are, please, send me an email. I'll be glad to hook you up with other people. But I think that's where the state of knowledge and practice is going to go. There are a number of persons working on biofertilizers. You may know that, either bacterial or fungal. Rusty Rodriguez these are rice seedlings in a growth medium at 1 day, 2 days, 4 days, 8 days. And the ones on the left have been sterilized, surface sterilized, no inhabitants. On the right in each of those trials is where they injected or inserted a fungus, Fusarium culmorum. And Fusarium is usually a very bad fungus if you're a plant pathologist for tomatoes and so forth. But the presence of that bacteria in the seed affects how it germinates and puts out its roots very substantially. So, we don't have good final answers, but it's really interesting. And so the effects we see with SRI, which I showed you, I think are bound up with soil biology and soil plant biology. And because this works with other plants, even sunflower, even eggplants, we find that if you work the soil, break it up, make it very friable, get organic matter in, start with seedlings very carefully, handle so the roots have a good place to grow, they perform better, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 or more percent. And so I think that's got to be attributable back to changes in the soil biota, which Father Launey's set of practices sort of very inductively, no theory guiding, just seeing what works and trying things that farmers are doing, some of his own ideas, to create this growth environment below ground and above ground for the plant to express the potential it already has. Is that bad news for the seed companies, for the plant breeders? I hope they won't take it that way. They probably will. You can do an awful lot with what we have already, a lot more we're not doing now, but to continue to make improvements, and I prefer, conventional breeding to the GM approach, but sometimes I'll even justify to myself a GM approach. We want better genotypes, but let's not be so genocentric that we think it's all the genes. The genes are the starting point, and you want the best starting point you can have. If you're a farmer, you want to get the most return for your labor and your land and your water and everything. So you want to start with a good G, but the G by E interaction is something which has really been underestimated, understated. So I'm hoping get you all excited about that. Where are the women? Please, Laura.
I think one of the things that we certainly learned through development and from the Green Revolution is that technology is rarely socially...
A little more loudly?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we learned was that technology is rarely socially neutral. Mm-hmm. And certainly with the Green Revolution, we saw in some cases concentration of land ownership, greater income gaps. And certainly with the method of SRI, there are more yields. People might have more to eat. But could you comment a bit about what you think might be some of the social structural impacts of the results of SRI?
Okay, that's a good question. I should mention, maybe preface it, say we have one wonderful colleague in Pakistan, in the Punjab, who's a very rich farmer, big farmer. He made a lot of money importing machinery from US, Britain, Germany for 30 years. He was the first farmer to laser level his fields, which means he's very progressive technically. About 4 years ago, he said, this technology is not working. We're ruining our soil. It's getting salinized, it's getting degraded. The water's not there. He happened to find our website and started reading, got excited. He looked at the conservation of agriculture also. And because he's rich and he has a big machine shop, he could then develop machine. He said, and he's progressive. He didn't want to be taking away jobs from labor. He said, but in rural Punjab, they are not able-bodied laborers for agriculture anymore. They go to the cities for understandable reasons. So we got to make SRI more labor-saving, or we can't capitalize upon this. So we adapted 3 different machines. So first of all, he takes laser and machinery and lasers. His test plot was 20 acres. And not a little. It was 20 acres was his test plot. He had a machine that would make raised beds, permanent raised beds, and heave up the soil and dig it out. So he had 45-inch beds, 90-inch furrows either side. And the machine that went down to also plant or make holes, plunk, 9 inches apart. And then the second machine is this really Rube Goldberg kind of thing where you have the labor sit in reasonable comfort. They drop 10-day seedlings into each hole as they go down that bed. The machine infuses or injects a little bit of compost and fertilizer into the hole, so it's precision application. You cut the total amount greatly. And then once you've got that seedling sitting in the hole, the big tank of water on the machine fills the hole up, because this is on dry soil, and this sort of stirs up, and then the particles gather on the roots. Then we have the whole thing transplanted in like 3 hours, not 10 days or whatever it would normally take for that large an area. He floods the whole field to 1 inch above the top of the bunds, or the beds, and then lets that sink in. And that's all the irrigation he does. He uses siphons for furrow irrigation from there on, periodically. And they have certain machines, a weeder, that goes down these beds. And it's set up so he doesn't even need to have a driver on it. Because see, when you have the bins, you can set the machine so it'll stay within the beds. He hasn't figured out how to make it turn, but he can make it work down there. But he gets really good weeding, or I would say soil aeration, breaking up soil within plants. His plants average 90 tillers. His yield measured by technicians from the Pakistan Agricultural Research Council was 12 tons per hectare. In Punjab, 4 to 5 is normal. And he cut his water by 70% and cut his labor by 70%. Now, it turns out the machinery is pretty expensive, so it hasn't spread. I mean, he knows what he can do, but they're adapting this out for wheat and potatoes and other crops as well. So what he's trying to do is break the labor constraint, which you have in some parts of the third world even. We say there's lots of labor, but it's not in agriculture and it's not able to do the work expected. He does rent his machines out to small farmers, and he helped one group of 100 farmers squat and take over 100 acres from the Pakistan Army, which was a little controversial. He's trying to figure out how do we get the biological productivity benefits, but to use our water, reduce care and labor as well. He can pay the laborers who do the work very well because there's high skill and high productivity. So to come back to the larger question, my sense is that our first priority was always the food deficit households. Farmers who are in deficit, who produce, and then because they're in debt, they sell their crop at a low price at harvest time, and 5 months later they're back borrowing from the moneylender again, are in a cycle of debt servitude, really. And so our first concern, and maybe we didn't think all the things ahead, but we really want to help the farmers who are in deficit to be able to feed themselves, get some surplus they have. If we're successful, then the supply compared to demand is going to change relationships, and prices are going to start coming down. Now, for the big farmers who are doing lots of rice, will then really suffer from that. Middle farmers also might. By raising the productivity and lowering production costs, in fact, the price can come down and you can still make money. It won't be as much as before. My hope is that we're going to, within 5 to 10 years, have a real impact on the price of basic staples. Poor people spend 60, 70% of their incomes, very poor incomes, on just subsistence. And if we can get the price of the grain, wheat, rice, and the other crops to come down by, I think by 50% at least, that's a huge anti-poverty program. And it means that people don't have to sell their labor at whatever someone will give them, so they can just keep body and soul together. And so I think ultimately this is really going to have an effect on making the lower groups more independent, more able to choose. Marguerite and I were in Bihar about 3 years ago, talking to some of the women's self-help groups who are using SRI in the summer season and then SWI in the winter season for wheat. And we asked both in Gaya district and in Muzaffarpur district, what's your food security situation like? And they talk among themselves, because that's what we used to have about 2 or 3 months of our own food, in which case they scrambled the rest of the year. The husband had to migrate somewhere to earn some kind of meager living somewhere to help feed the family. Now they're up to 6 and 7 months per year. Now that's about tripling of the food. Now it's still not 12. They still got a ways to go. But I think we can actually get them up to there once they're fully utilizing these methods, even on small parcels of land. I think that we're going to be able to make a family self-sufficient for its basic grains with as little as 200 square meters. Because if you're getting a 15-ton yield, which is quite possible, that's enough to feed a family of 5. So we're trying to figure out how do you make food less of a oppressive factor in people's lives. Now people are desperate. They must find a way to keep body and soul together. I think these productivity gains will be something that can spread very widely. The richer ones may also be able to benefit from it, because if they can become profitable still on large scale with mechanization, that helps the urban poor. Not all the poor are in rural areas. We often think of it that way, and I do myself. But getting the food costs way down would be one of the best ways we can help to change the opportunity structure for much, if not all, of humankind. So I think there's some potentially very large impacts. At the moment, I don't want to get into that, partly because I don't want to get the powers that be too upset. I think it's going to come whether they like it or not. Because the fact is that this is there. It's already in the genes of the plants. It's already in the soil systems. But we have not been managing them in a way that will utilize that. And the fact is that once you know that, no one can stop you from planting young seedlings very well. Can they come out and rip up your field because you planted 10-day seedlings instead of 30-day seedlings? I don't think so. They could try to cut off the water, I suppose, in the irrigation system for those who don't have it. There could be still some unpleasantness. I don't want to say it's all roses necessarily. But I think because it's there and we now know it's there, and a lot of scientists know it's there, the donor agencies are learning it's there, and if they really want to fulfill their mandate, they should be taking advantage of this. And we're ready. We got information, and we keep saying, don't just go out and adopt a 1 million hectare project. Let's, in whatever country you want to work in, let's start and try it, fine-tune it. I just learned about 6 weeks ago about a farmer agriculture trainer working with the St. Joseph Brothers in an ag training station in Sierra Leone, who's been doing this since 2002, and he never told us. He's produced beautiful, manuals with pictures from his own experience with farmers, and we've now got farmers, working in Liberia who are starting to do this. So this is knowledge. It's not technology. I did use the word technology twice tonight, and I almost bit my tongue a bit when I did that. Sorry. We say it's not a technology. It's ideas, insights, understandings, which get applied materially, but the basic, force really is ideas. And as the wonderful German song, Die Gedanken sind frei, the ideas are free, and that's the way a university ought to work. We work mostly with ideas. We're not a business. We're not, providing material inputs. We should be working with and providing ideas. And I think here's a place where we have ideas. Unfortunately, a lot of people are pretty wedded to the older ideas. So it's not always easy to get them to adjust or adapt, but more are coming. And especially, I think the next generation should not have as much of a vested interest in the old theories and journal articles and so forth. So that's why, when Laura contacted me, I really should come and talk to you. Hey, you guys have got to pick this up and make much more of it than we could so far. I wish I could be many years younger than I am. I'm not. So it's going to be up to you guys to figure out how to take these and run with them. But do it with farmers. That's something Laura will certainly endorse. This has been also the other thing, talking about social structure. We have, in every country we worked, I think, had an impact already on the way extension works. It's no longer the researchers telling extension what to tell the farmers to do. But see, the farmers often know more about this than the researchers do. And we like what's called the triangular model. Did you read about that when you were at Cornell? This published in ISNAR in 1990, Debbie Merrill Sands and David Kaimowitz, in which he says, instead of this linear model, we need a triangular model, where researchers, extension facilitators, and farmers are interacting. In that sense, I think we have a lot of democratization in this. In fact, again, I'm a little perseverating, but it's a wonderful. When we had our first and so far only international conference on SRI in China in 2002, we had 3 people coming from Sri Lanka. One was the Additional Secretary of Agriculture, who had been our first champion, a good friend of mine, a civil servant, who had done his own SRI to show that he knew what he was talking about. We have the Deputy Minister of Agriculture and this wonderful innovative farmer I mentioned before who trained Tamil farmers and trained thousands of farmers himself. And the 4 of us ended up at the hotel one day early. And the hotel clerk said, sorry, we don't have enough rooms. We could give you 2 rooms, can't give you 4. You'll have to double up. And the minister said, I'll share a room with Premaratna, the farmer, because they knew that Gami and I were long friends. How often do you see a minister sharing a room with a farmer voluntarily? Now, in this case, the 2 had worked together on SRI, and Premaratna helped show him the weeding techniques. He'd done 16 varieties on his farm and gotten from about 12 to 16-ton yields. But we've seen a lot of camaraderie, egalitarianism that goes with this. So in that sense, it has a little bit of a solvent effect, I think, in a lot of the hierarchy which we've had before. Is that just my wishful thinking? I can't prove it's not, but I think I've seen this. Also, the other thing we have from a number of places, told by colleagues, that they see farmers starting to work together more cooperatively once this is introduced. Both Cambodia and Mali, my colleagues have told me spontaneously that they see farmers' cooperativeness increase. I mean, in part you say, this is what's a great gift? Suddenly they're getting this from the ideas, and so they feel more generous, less insecure, and so it helps to create those things. So there may be effects we don't understand yet, but if someone's sociologically inclined, I'd love to have them study this, do interviews and other kinds of things to see what's going on at the local levels. And I think there's going to be some changes, but I can't predict them all. The other thing I have learned, you cannot predict. Yogi Berra says it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And I'm a real Berraite. So many things he says make a lot of sense to me. And I don't know where this is going to go. If I saw harmful things, I'd be trying to steer away. I haven't found them yet, but I have to say there could be. The history tells us there can be, but so far, pretty much all roses. There are a few places, I was asking, where you don't get those results. That doesn't surprise me. It disappoints me, but I'm not surprised. But then also we see some really huge improvements and increases, which for most people, they just can't quite comprehend them. But farmers who've seen them, or as Margaret, I see, she's been in the field, you can see it again and again and again, this phenotypical difference. And we can measure it, how many tillers, how many grains per panicle, weight of grain. One of the interesting things, for instance, research, and this is one of our really good POC research in India, found that if you take the same variety of rice and do comparison trials, and SR rice we plant very shallow. Don't stick it in 2, 3, 4 centimeters, but just 1 or 2. Turns out that the same variety of rice will have its tillers more horizontal, less upright, but its leaves are more upright. And he's measured this, so there's like 70% more light interception, even with 1/10 as many plants, because they put up more tillers, more leaves, and the angle is such that they catch that and convert that into grain. So this is a case where the plant is really responding in ways we didn't expect. It was a surprise, but it's there. If we also can show greenhouse gas reduction, that I think will help, because right now that's all the rage in Washington and Brussels and so forth. We have now actually a fair number of papers, good scientific papers that would support that. We still want more research. I mean, that's a really tricky thing because highly variable results anyway. But I think that's also going to be another one of the benefits. Again, I could talk about this long time, and as Laura knows, I've gone over time. She knew I would do that, though. So anyway, I'm glad for your attention. You have the website. I think you can learn a lot from that. Is this used in the U.S.? No one asked that question. There are about half a dozen farmers now who this last year have used SRI in New York, New Jersey, South Carolina, and Louisiana. And one up in Maine is doing wheat. So they're finding the same ideas can work in U.S. conditions. I wish we were doing this really on a wide scale in California, given their water scarcity, but there's so far been no interest coming from California. That's a bad note to end on, but I probably should end there. Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure.